For decades, Machu Picchu has stood as a beacon of wonder, mystery, and ancient energy. Travelers from all corners of the globe have hiked its worn stone paths, mesmerized by the silent majesty of the Inca ruins and the clouds that seem to veil the mountain peaks like guardians of long-forgotten secrets. But not every visitor returns. What you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's based on real events, real people, and a disappearance that remains unsolved to this day. As you listen, ask yourself, what really happened? Was it a tragic accident, or something far beyond our understanding? I want to know what you think. Drop your theory in the comments, no matter how wild or impossible it sounds. And if stories like this keep you up at night in the best way, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This is just one of many mysteries waiting to be uncovered together. In the winter of 1989, a young European tourist named Erik Drawhs vanished without a trace during what appeared to be a routine tour of the sacred site. He was 27, a Dutch national traveling solo, equipped with only a backpack, a film camera, and a small leather-bound notebook he used like a personal archaeological journal. What began as a standard trek through the citadel would unravel into one of the most unsettling mysteries ever recorded in the Cusco region. Erik had been staying at a modest lodge in Aguas Calientes, the sleepy town nestled at the mountain's base. There he shared meals with other backpackers, laughed with the innkeepers, and spoke excitedly about his plan to explore lesser-known trails branching off from the ancient Inca Trail. He wasn't reckless or inexperienced, far from it. He held a degree in pre-Columbian history, spoke decent Spanish, and according to the local authorities had secured proper permits to access the archaeological zones. But on the morning of July 3, 1989, Erik set off from the lodge with his gear and simply never came back. Initially, local officials launched a limited search, suspecting he had merely lost his way. But as days turned into weeks with no sign of him, whispers of something far darker began to take hold. A week after his disappearance, his backpack surfaced curiously intact in a steep, overgrown ravine nearly 3 hours beyond the main tourist path. It was zipped shut, bearing no signs of tampering. Inside, investigators found his notebook still full of detailed entries, his camera with the film untouched, and an old compass etched with strange symbols that didn't match any known navigational charts. No one could explain why Erik had strayed so far off the mapped routes, or what could have compelled him into an area locals quietly warned outsiders to avoid. Some believed he'd met with a tragic accident. Others feared he'd crossed paths with looters, or worse. But among the more superstitious, a chilling rumor took hold that he had disturbed something ancient, something meant to remain hidden. His disappearance would eventually morph into legend. But what most people didn't know is that this story wasn't over, not even close. 15 years later, in the spring of 2004, deep in the jungle near Vilcabamba, a discovery would shake everything once thought to be true about Erik's case. Before I continue with what happened next, let me ask, where are you listening to this from? You might be closer to the mystery than you realize. That May, a group of independent researchers led by Peruvian biologist Alvaro Maita and backed by a German conservation foundation, ventured into the wilderness around Vilcabamba to document native species. None of them expected to stumble upon a clue tied directly to one of the most haunting disappearances of the late 80s. In a narrow gorge choked with moss and tangled vines while tracking a rare type of wild orchid, one of the assistants noticed an unnatural shape, half buried among the roots of ancient trees. It wasn't a cave nor a naturally formed shelter. It was a crude structure, stones stacked with care-dry branches interwoven like insulation, a clear attempt to create refuge from the harsh rainforest elements. Inside that crude shelter, the team discovered the mold-ridden remains of a backpack, a severely damaged vintage camera shreds of decayed fabric, and a rusted metal box with the initials EVD etched onto its lid. The items were carefully collected and sent to Cusco for analysis, stirring immediate curiosity among the researchers. It was a local anthropologist who, faintly recalling the long, cold case of Erik Drawhs from 1989, connected the initials to the missing tourist. Within days, the story was back in headlines across the region. Possible remains of vanished European traveler found near Vilcabamba, read the newspapers. What had once been a fading echo of the past was now a headline again. But the most chilling find wasn't the torn backpack or the battered camera. It was what they discovered sealed inside a wax-covered cloth, a journal remarkably intact, despite the humidity, its pages still legible. What those pages revealed defied all expectations. Erik had written in detail about feeling stalked by something unseen. He described hearing chanting deep in the night coming from places where no human should have been. On one of the final pages he wrote, "I'm not alone. Something is watching me. I don't understand what I've found, but it's not Incan. It's older. Much older." Those words sent a chill through the team. What had Erik stumbled upon in that forgotten pocket of the jungle? And why, the deeper he explored, did he seem more convinced that what he was seeing belonged to a time beyond memory? This discovery didn't close the file. It blew it wide open. Whispers of conspiracy and ancient curses stirred once more. Was this a tragic accident? A disappearance by choice? Or, as some dared to suggest, had Erik unearthed something buried beneath the folds of Andean history that should have never been brought to light? He had ventured into the jungle searching for answers. 15 years later, his words had only summoned more questions. Following the discovery of Erik Drawhs' journal, global media refocused its gaze on Peru. The Ministry of Culture ordered a full forensic analysis of the items recovered, while a team of specialists in historical document preservation began restoring the journal, painstakingly treating each fragile page. What they found shattered every conventional theory. Among Erik's entries were hand-drawn maps coordinates that didn't match any known tourist routes, and cryptic symbols, some faintly resembling pre-Incan glyphs, others more aligned with indigenous shamanic rituals passed down through oral tradition. The last pages were especially damaged, but experts managed to salvage several crucial fragments. One note read, "I saw faces carved into stone. This isn't a dream. They've been here longer than time has a name." Another warned, "If anything happens to me, no one must follow this trail. This is not a path meant for us." These words, heavy with mysticism and dread, reignited the fascination of researchers, conspiracy theorists, and cultural historians alike. Speculation ran wild, from theories about lost civilizations to whispered talk of ancient gateways to other dimensions hidden within the Andes. Meanwhile, Erik's family was contacted in the Netherlands. His parents, now elderly and worn by years of uncertainty, were skeptical at first. 15 years of unanswered questions had left them guarded. But once they were shown the journal and confirmed that the handwriting belonged to their son, they agreed to return to Peru to join a new expedition based on the coordinates found in the notebook. "If there's a chance we can understand what really happened to Erik, then we'll follow it to the end," his mother told a Dutch journalist traveling with them. her voice trembling with held-back emotion. A multidisciplinary team was assembled: archaeologists, linguists, pre-Columbian culture experts, and a European film crew preparing to journey deep into Vilcabamba's wilderness. What they would uncover wouldn't just shed light on Erik's fate. It would stir something far more unsettling within the global scientific community, a quiet alarm that maybe the myths we've dismissed for centuries are merely distorted memories of real events still echoing through time. At dawn on September 17, 2004, the expedition departed from Cusco, setting their course into the dense, unyielding jungle of Vilcabamba. Armed with advanced gear, thermal imaging cameras, drones, and weeks' worth of supplies, they were joined by a local shaman brought in on the advice of nearby villagers. "This place was never meant for tourists," he murmured, eyes fixed on the distant ridgelines, as if he saw something hidden in the mist. What had started as a research trek began to shift in mood, with every mile quieter, heavier, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The trees above closed in like a canopy of shadow, and even the most skeptical members of the team couldn't shake the creeping sense that they were being watched. By the third day of trekking through the dense jungle, they stumbled upon their first clue: a small, cold fire pit, reduced to a circle of gray ash, and a torn scrap of fabric that eerily matched the material of the backpacks common in the late 80s, just like the one Erik Drawhs had used. But what truly unsettled them was an inscription carved into a moss-covered stone hidden behind a curtain of thick vines. It wasn't fresh, and it wasn't familiar. The marking appeared ancient, but its style didn't match anything any of the archaeologists had studied before. It was a symbol, a reversed spiral encircled by faceless humanoid figures, etched with uncanny precision. When the shaman laid eyes on it, he muttered something low and guttural in Quechua, then flatly refused to continue. "This place is a cursed gate," he warned, voice trembling, "and those who cross it never return the same." Despite his ominous words, the rest of the team pressed forward. Guided by the coordinates from Erik's journal, they pushed into terrain untouched by any modern maps or known trails. That was when the strange phenomena began. Their equipment malfunctioned without reason. GPS devices froze batteries, drained inexplicably. Compasses spun wildly. At night, the jungle no longer just rustled, it whispered. Soft, unintelligible voices seemed to ride the wind just beneath the range of comprehension. Team members began experiencing vivid dreams, each more disturbing than the last. Hooded figures, submerged ruins, and a hollow-eyed Erik Drawhs pleading with them, "Turn back." On the 7th day, through the early morning mist, they spotted something carved into the stone hillside, an entrance partially swallowed by vines and moss. It wasn't listed in any archaeological catalog, and its construction didn't resemble any known Andean culture. Above the doorway, carved with an unnatural exactness, was the same spiral symbol they'd encountered before. The air changed, then an unnatural stillness gripped the jungle. No birds, no insects, just breath and the distant scrape of something moving slowly out of sight. No one dared say it aloud, but the thought haunted them all. Erik Drawhs had made it here before them, and whatever he found or awakened had never let him leave. The decision to enter that stone structure split the group. Some argued for caution, insisting they document everything first. Others felt a pulsing urgency, as if being pulled forward by a will not their own. In the end, 4 members stepped inside, flashlights in hand, cameras at the ready, and hearts thudding under a pressure so heavy it felt like the air itself was closing in. Inside, There was only darkness. The stone walls, slick and cold to the touch, were covered in repeating patterns of the spiral symbol, smaller, tighter, relentless. No spiders, no insects, no signs of life. Only silence. And something else, a faint hum barely perceptible like the structure itself, was breathing. After 5 minutes of tense exploration, one of them tripped over something solid. A beam of light revealed it, a dented metal canteen, the surface aged but unmistakable. Even through the rust, the engraving was clear. Erik Drawhs, 1989. It hadn't been dropped by accident. It had been placed there. Nearby, beneath a light layer of soil and dust, they uncovered what looked like a primitive altar. Atop the stone slab, precisely arranged, were a soaked notebook, a shattered Polaroid camera, and a small stone figurine with a blank, featureless face. Some pages in the notebook were still legible. The last entry, scrawled in haste and barely coherent, read, "If you find this, do not wake it." The air grew thick, suffocating. A low vibration crept through the corridor walls, rising into a high-pitched hum like a distant, sorrowful wail. Their flashlights flickered erratically, the temperature dropping so fast their breath began to fog. It was then that the youngest of the explorers turned toward the end of the corridor and whispered, "Did you see that?" No one replied, but they all felt it, a shift in the air, a sudden pressure like the room itself had exhaled. Something had stirred, something that had been waiting. They bolted from the structure, breathless and rattled, carrying only the journal and the canteen. Outside, the shaman stood motionless, eyes shut, his lips murmuring in rhythm with some prayer older than memory. When he saw what they held, he shook his head slowly and uttered a single sentence. "You didn't find it. It called you." That night, the camp fell under an eerie hush. No one ate. No one spoke. In their dreams, Erik returned not as he had been, but changed. Gaunt, pale, smiling with a calm that chilled the soul. By morning, the shaman was gone. When the expedition finally emerged from the jungle, weary and silent, they weren't met with the stillness they expected. The world already knew. A drone sent days earlier by the European TV crew had transmitted haunting footage, the hidden structure, the spiral symbol, the recovered coordinates. But what truly shocked the public was a photo captured deep within the hallway, a shadowed silhouette standing in the darkness. Upright, human, watching. The press quickly gave the site a name, the Sanctuary of Erik. The journal was scanned, dissected, and shared across every corner of the internet. Scholars in paleography, anthropology, and psychology pored over Erik's frantic scrawls as though deciphering sacred scripture. Some claimed he had been lured by a forgotten cult. Others suggested he'd found an isolated community practicing ancient rites. But the most disturbing theory came from a German linguist. According to him, the symbols covering the walls bore no resemblance to any known human language. Instead, they followed a structure eerily similar to binary code, suggesting a form of communication, not of this earth. Back in the Netherlands, Erik's belongings were returned to his parents in a private ceremony. As his mother clutched the rusted canteen, she wept softly and whispered, "He's still here." She didn't mean in the jungle. She meant something else, something no one dared to name aloud. Within a week of returning, several members of the expedition began having identical dreams. In them, they wandered the jungle alone. And always, at some point, a voice would whisper their name. Then the cameraman disappeared from his home without a trace. His phone was found later playing on loop the warped audio from the tape uncovered at the altar. That same week, the Peruvian government sealed off the site, declaring it a protected cultural zone. But that didn't stop what followed. Clandestine footage began circulating online, grainy clips, showing lights drifting through the trees, guttural chanting that didn't sound human, and shadows that moved soundlessly like smoke with a mind of its own. And then the final piece of the puzzle surfaced. A letter postmarked in 1994 arrived at the Dutch embassy in Lima. The envelope was weathered, its paper brittle, as though it had spent years buried. Signed simply, E. The message inside read, "Do not try to bring me back. I no longer belong to your time, but I'm still watching." With the global release of the letter, Erik Drawhs' case shifted from a missing person mystery to a worldwide obsession. Social media ignited with theories, interpretations, and feverish speculation. Conspiracy forums swirled with one dominant idea. Erik hadn't just survived, he had crossed into something ancient, something hidden, something sacred. He had been chosen. His name began appearing in street murals, whispered in songs inked into skin, as tattoos symbolizing transcendence and hidden truth. Across France, Germany, and the United States, communities emerged calling themselves the Watchers of Vilcabamba people, who claimed to have shared the same dreams, who believed Erik hadn't vanished. He had awakened. A voice spoke to them in languages none could understand, fluid, alien, and strangely intimate. In the heart of the jungle, something called them by name, as if it had always known who they were. A Japanese author later published a best-selling book titled Erik, Guardian of the Threshold, translated into over 20 languages. In it, he proposed a theory as bold as it was unsettling that Erik Drawhs had been chosen, recruited by a dormant planetary consciousness that awakened every few centuries to correct the trajectory of humanity. Meanwhile, Erik's mother, now a reluctant public figure, appeared in interviews, not seeking fame, but remembrance. "I don't want attention," she told one reporter, her eyes distant, hollow with loss. "I just want people to remember him." In one appearance, she held up a smooth stone she had received by mail months after returning from Peru. There was no return address. The stone was identical to those found on the altar deep in the ruins, carved with a familiar spiral. She claimed that when she touched it, she felt Erik's presence nearby. Stranger still, the stone emitted a soft hum after sundown. Under growing public pressure, both the Peruvian and Dutch governments were urged to reopen the case. New satellite flyovers were conducted to scan the Vilcabamba region. During one of these flights, a discovery was made blurry, yet deeply unsettling. A solitary humanoid figure appeared walking through an uninhabitable part of the jungle, precisely where Erik's journal had been found. Dressed in a loose white robe, the figure seemed to glance upward and smile. Despite efforts to suppress the footage, it leaked. The media quickly dubbed the figure the Monk of Vilcabamba. Some were convinced it was Erik. Others believed it was a hoax. But most agreed on one thing: whatever had begun in 1989 had not ended. It was only just beginning. While the satellites continued to return puzzling images and the official investigations became mired in red tape, something even more unsettling was stirring beneath the surface. Local guides, many descended from Quechua lineages, began refusing to enter certain areas of the forest. "The jungle breathes there," they whispered with a reverence laced in fear. Their stories all shared the same spine-chilling details: animals fleeing without cause, trees leaking a thick red sap when cut, compasses spinning like broken clocks, and disembodied whispers coming from nowhere and everywhere. One of these guides, Juan Gila, agreed to speak with a foreign journalist digging into Erik's story. During their trek, Juan suddenly stopped and pointed to a stone half buried beneath a blanket of dry leaves. It was the size of a notebook, and on it once again was the spiral. Around it symbols no scholar had ever translated. But the strangest moment came that night. As the team settled into camp, every flashlight died simultaneously. Batteries drained within minutes. A dense fog crept in, unnaturally thick, wrapping around the tents, like a living thing, even though the sky above remained clear and star-filled. The journalist managed to record part of the event on an old cassette Walkman. Though most of the audio had been damaged by moisture, one fragment played clearly a woman's voice whispering in French over and over again, "Je suis encore là. Je suis encore là. I'm still here." When he played the recording for a team of sound experts, one of them, an ex-intelligence analyst, went pale. He identified the sound wave pattern as identical to those used in classified military transmissions during the 1980s. From that moment, new theories emerged. Some linked Erik's case to clandestine experiments, hidden gateways between dimensions, or contact with something civilization wasn't yet prepared to comprehend. What was certain is that after that night, the journalist walked away from the project for good. He sold everything, disappeared from the public eye, and is rumored to live in a remote monastery in the Swiss Alps. No phone, no internet. Some say he hasn't slept through a single night since. The scientific community fractured. Some dismissed the entire chain of events as a web of coincidences stretched thin by mass hysteria and internet lore. But others, anthropologists, astrobiologists, and cultural historians, began re-examining ancient Incan manuscripts and forgotten colonial accounts with a new urgency, wondering if perhaps they had overlooked something vital all along. Several ancient documents spoke of the chosen ones, individuals who crossed into the jungle and never returned yet, whose presence lingered in impossible ways. One manuscript described a place where time bends and the soul is tested. And more people began to believe that Erik Drawhs hadn't vanished. He'd been summoned. In 2004, 15 years after Erik's disappearance, a new expedition led by Peruvian archaeologist Dr. Nicolas Alzamora ventured back into the restricted wilderness where satellite scans had picked up anomalies. The mission was quietly funded by a private Swiss foundation whose representatives declined interviews, offering only a cryptic explanation they were following forgotten coordinates. What they discovered defied all known logic. 70 kilometers from the last recorded trace of Erik, beyond the reach of drones and GPS, they found a cave hidden behind a rock slide. Inside, cloaked in moss, moisture, and utter darkness, was an altar chiseled directly into the living stone. But what stunned them most was what sat atop it. A weathered travel journal lay on the central rock, its cover damp but intact, the pages legible. On the first page, written in Dutch, were the words, "If you've found this, it means I saw it too." There was no doubt it belonged to Erik Drawhs. The handwriting matched, as did the dates, except the final entries were dated 1994, 5 years after his disappearance. In them, Erik wrote of discovering a path invisible to the eye, something that could only be sensed through breath. He described losing all hunger, how time no longer moved the same, and dreaming vividly of his own childhood. Though he claimed never to have slept, another page detailed encounters with humanoid figures made of light songs without language, and a living door that opened only when one was willing to surrender everything they'd ever been. His final message, scrawled and barely legible, read, "I'm not lost. I'm closer than ever." The most baffling part: Despite the journal's aged appearance, it showed no signs of mold or insect damage. It was as if it had been placed there only days before. The journal was shipped to European labs for testing. Radiocarbon analysis confirmed the paper was manufactured in 1988. But the ink didn't match any commercial brand from that era. A German chemist concluded it was a compound with no known origin, something not made by human hands at that time. The findings were swiftly buried. The Peruvian government designated the area a critical archaeological reserve and closed off all access. Only one backlit photo of the journal made its way online, briefly surfacing on conspiracy forums before disappearing entirely. The Swiss Foundation never returned to Latin America. But for those who had followed the case from the beginning, that photo was enough. Erik had been there. And maybe he still was. Today, the case of Erik Drawhs remains one of the most haunting, unresolved disappearances in modern tourism history. No body, no witnesses, no definitive proof of what happened. All that remains are his notebooks, fragments of a growing obsession, and a trail closed off by official silence. His family never set foot in South America again, and every year on the anniversary of his disappearance, his older sister Ingrid posts the same message on a Dutch forum: "I'm still waiting where the world ends." But then, in 2019, something else happened. An amateur hiker camping near the edge of the restricted zone captured something strange with his drone. In a fog-draped clearing stood a tall figure dressed in a stained white t-shirt. The figure looked up and raised a hand as if waving. The footage was uploaded to the internet and vanished within 24 hours. The hiker's account was deleted, and he hasn't posted since. But someone managed to download the image first. When enhanced, some believe they see familiar features in the pixelated face, the same eyes from Erik's passport photo, the same quiet smile. Skeptics called it a hoax, a prank. But those who've studied the case for years noticed one detail that couldn't be explained away. On the wrist of the figure glinted a handmade bracelet, red and blue. The very one Erik's mother had given him before his journey to Peru. Some mysteries don't need answers to stay alive. Some, like this one, seem to exist to remind us that not everything in this world can or should be explained. That there are paths which open only to those willing to lose themselves in the process. And as long as someone remembers his name, Erik Drawhs will keep walking those mountains. All right, friends, if you're still here at the end of this wild, eerie journey, thank you. Truly. This story has haunted me for weeks, maybe months. It started as a deep dive into a missing person case from 1989 and ended with me questioning the very nature of time consciousness and what we think we know about the world around us. Now, I'm not here to tell you what really happened to Erik Drawhs. That's not my job, and maybe that's the point. But let's just take a moment to process what we've uncovered. A young Dutch traveler disappears without a trace in Machu Picchu. 15 years later, his journal is found miles from the original site, filled with descriptions of unseen watchers, ancient languages, and warnings not to disturb what lies hidden. Then we've got drone footage dreams shared across continents, mysterious recordings, and a sighting in 2019 that seems impossible. So what are we dealing with here? Some say Erik was simply lost and never found. But if that's the case, how do we explain the entries dated years after his disappearance? Others believe he discovered a lost civilization, maybe one that exists off the grid deep in the jungle. And then, of course, there are the darker theories, ancient rituals, interdimensional doorways, or some kind of intelligent force that calls to those who dare to look too closely. There's a theory I keep circling back to. Maybe Erik was chosen like his mother said. Not in a sci-fi chosen one way, but in a cosmic, almost mythological sense. Maybe some people are drawn to places not because they're curious, but because something on the other side is curious about them. Maybe Erik didn't get lost. Maybe he crossed over. But hey, that's just one take. And this is where I want to hear from you. What do you think happened to Erik Drawhs? Was it a cover-up? A cosmic calling? A misstep into a dimension we barely understand? Do you believe in what some are calling the Watchers of Vilcabamba? Or is all of this just a beautiful, terrifying example of how the human mind connects dots where none exist? Drop your theory in the comments below. No idea is too crazy here. I read every single one, and trust me, this community is smart, creative, and full of deep thinkers. If something in this story stuck with you or sent chills down your spine, let's talk about it. And if you want more stories like this strange, unsolved, maybe a little uncomfortable, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're just getting started. Until next time, remember, some paths aren't meant to be mapped, and some names aren't meant to be forgotten.